have multiple measures of value so that there's a more holistic understanding of how to make the proper decisions for an organization.
But as I was thinking about this, Mike, getting ready for it, I decided that I would put this graphic up just to orient people before we jump in to the exercise. When we talk about multiple capitals, this is what we're talking about. Multi-capital, integrated management, reporting, thinking. I mean, it's being used in a lot of ways, but basically it's a way to connect the dots with value that you own and value that you rely on and that you try to attract to your organization. So we all know the traditional, and I know you are experts on what the is in this model is called manufactured capital. It's basically hard assets. We all know about financial capital. Ron and all the folks at LES focus on intellectual capital. So that's not only intellectual property, but all of the systems and knowledge and process and everything that's inside our computers that is a huge driver of value. Our people, our relationships, natural capital, we have to consider our footprint, how we use resources. And, my seventh capital that I use when I use this in my consulting work is basically the nucleus at the center: purpose, business model, profits, what your culture is, how it all comes together. So we're in a moment where a lot of different trends and activities are coming together. We obviously have the traditional that's been around for a long time. The intangible capital world has been rising over the past couple of decades because of the rise of technology, right? And then the ESG movement, as it's often called, environmental social governance, is bringing this focus on externalities. And now it's all coming together, and there's a lot of movement in terms of standards and all kinds of stuff, which I won't go into. But
Mary,
yes.
Will you go into how environmental, social, and governance focused companies fared over the pandemic?
Happy to mention that. So thinking about these external stakeholders, your footprint, how what kind of ripple effect you have in the world, has been an increasing priority of institutional investors for public companies, for public entities. You may have encountered this when you went to do a bond raising, raise money through a bond or a rating agency. Everybody's paying attention to this now. A big reason is that there are systemic risks that can't be diversified away through a portfolio. And so investors are placing a lot of emphasis on this. And then companies themselves and organizations have been placing a lot of emphasis. And the really interesting thing is that this kind of performance is being tracked, and there's a lot of data now. And as we've gone through the pandemic, the companies that rate highly on ESG, so on this kind of integrated thinking and management, have been outperforming their peer indices by sometimes 2 times, but on average they're definitely outperforming. And it's very rare in the investor world that you find something that's so clearly an advantage, and it's leading to an acceleration of the requirements that companies do reporting and demonstrate that more than just saying they're doing this stuff, that they're starting to change. And one of the big reasons that's being posited, obviously, it'll take academics a few years to do their statistical analysis and everything, but basically the answer is that if you're engaged with your stakeholders, if you're thinking more broadly, then you're going to get better performance and be more resilient. And so when the pandemic came along, companies that had already developed a good relationship with stakeholders that people trusted were much more likely to do well or to survive, right? You can think about it, everything from a corner store all the way up to some of the giants. Now, not everybody's living this way, right? And not every company, but on average, it's what gives the alpha, the return that people are looking for. And it creates better sustainable companies. So I promise I do this exercise in 20 minutes. So we'll kind of go quickly, but that's the context. This is a worksheet that I use with clients, and it looks a little different, but it's a lot, it's basically the same thing. You have your relationship capital, the strategic capital. Under property, we have both hard assets, infrastructure, and then these knowledge assets, profile people, profile your natural capital. The idea behind this is very simple. It's that, in any situation, the first thing you want to do is understand what you have and make an inventory. It's always like totally second nature if you go into a situation and then their hard assets, the first thing you would do is keep track of them, right? But a lot of these other kinds of capital, people, believe it or not, don't think that way. So they don't really have that perspective. So I like to use this tool to help companies just think that through and begin to create a simple inventory. It starts to tell you who you should be talking to, what are the things that you should be looking for. And, this is so simplistic compared to the level of sophistication that I know folks in the ALN have, but you have to start somewhere, right? So this is a good baby step.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's just run through really quickly. We won't fill out the whole thing. I like to start with the first row because it'll give you an idea of what we're talking about here. And the company we're going to use is Federal Express. So we're going to do this in real time here. So I'm going to say FedEx, and I'm going to take some notes. It won't be perfect, but just as we remind. So I'm going to ask anybody chime in, unmute yourself. Who are the key customer groups for FedEx?
The world.
The world. A little more specific.
Retailers.
Retailers. So people that are shipping.
Consumers.
Say that again.
Consumers.
Consumers, right? So people that are receiving, right, the shipments.
Manufacturers.
And they're both sending and receiving, right?
Right.
We're not grading on spelling, so just
Yeah, no, that's right.
go right ahead.
The only thing I can say is that my typing's better than my handwriting. So in this case, we will go into the next row just for a second. Talk about partners for FedEx.
Manufacturers.
Well, fuel
The US
companies.
Post Office.
Right. Fuel companies. Another good example is the United States Postal Service, right? That last mile delivery for a lot of things they use.
Airports.
Airports. Yep. Very good. And the transportation, other, transportation contractors that they use in a lot of cases. So what's the value proposition? What is FedEx doing for all of these customers?
Jim Dieter, I'm calling on you.
Dependable delivery.
Okay.
And we'll add on time, right? Delivery.
Sure.
Because that's so much of what they're trying to do. So we know that FedEx, or at least the last time I checked, has one of the largest fleets of owned or leased airplanes. They have trucks, they have tracking systems. I mean, you know where I'm going with this, right? You have all kinds of hard assets that they're using. But one of the reasons I love this example is that if you think about FedEx and you think about all those hard assets they have, would you, and you had the choice of losing all your hard assets or all your quote unquote soft assets, which would you choose? So let's talk about that to understand the answer before I ask for answers. Let's talk about some of these other soft assets. So these aren't, in most cases, they're not on the balance sheet. But what are some of the key processes and kinds of data that FedEx uses to deliver on this value proposition?
Jack Kelly.
Okay, so you've got ordering processes, you've got scheduling processes, which you've got to be amazing to think of just the scheduling challenge that they have. All of the, basically the procurement processes that go into buying the fuel and to buying the other stuff that has to support their activities.
How about tracking?
Right, tracking, exactly
Yeah.
right.
So, and logistics and
Forecasting,
routing. Yeah.
Yeah.
forecasting for weather is what I'm thinking, because
Oh, yeah,
that's one of their
Point, yeah.
biggest risk mitigators.
yeah.
Yep, but not just weather, also forecasting demand.
That too, right. But when I think
Okay,
of FedEx, like the post office, they're supposed to come no matter what, and that doesn't always, Mother Nature doesn't always allow for that to be the case.
Right. So kind of, and these things go hand in hand, the processes and the data and the intellectual property, but what's some of the key data that FedEx is using to get those packages there on time?
Marty, Rowland, any ideas on the data they need?
On the, well, they need, well, the GIS, where people are, and maybe the ability to have the best route depending on the traffic.
And the weather too, Marty.
How about demand versus location or zip code?
Hmm.
In other words, how many trucks to put in each area?
A couple other examples are, if you think about, they go to whatever the number is, close to 200 countries. So you have,
Customs.
import regs and all the forms, all the stuff that they need. So, that whole thing, everything that basically gets to where they can tell any of us at any moment where a package is, right? If you sign up for it, you get an email that says, or a text, your package is out for delivery, all that kind of stuff.
They also
you
have to have, good data on their assets. They have to have, asset inventory and condition data.
Yeah. What's about to break down?
Which is just as important as actually having the asset, right? So if you think about the question I asked there, if you could choose, you could only keep your hard infrastructure or your soft infrastructure, which would you choose?
I'd keep my soft.
Yep, keep the soft and contract out the hard.
Anyone else? Anyone want to advocate for keeping just the hard?
So
I
I've
mean,
got a great example I use in talking about asset management is a restaurant, because often that's where I'm having the discussions. But I think it's, you can have a chef, you can have recipes, you can have great ideas, but you don't have anything without a building and tables and, everything you need in a kitchen.
Right.
So I don't see how you choose one over the other.
It's
Well-
what Jack said. It's what Jack said. You can lease a space, you can lease chairs, but you want to have the recipe. The recipes are what's going to actually differentiate yourself from the others, if you have to
Right.
make a choice.
If you had to make, and obviously it's a game, right? But generally you don't have to make that real choice. But your mention of the chef is a really good point, because when we, in this integrated way of thinking and managing, we're thinking about people, and we're really thinking about them in a few ways. We're thinking about them as a cost, right? It's an investment in them. The ESG movement is encouraging us, and as we should, think about them as people. Questions of equity, diversity, quality of life, work-life balance, all the things that we have to care about it for our people. But then we're also dealing with questions of that people are a productive asset, and this is harder to do in this really quick format. But if you want to just throw out a few ideas about competencies that folks that work at FedEx have to have, and sometimes it overlaps with culture as well, but let's just talk quickly about just a couple of those.
Well, so I'm an industrial engineer by education, and you sure need industrial engineering competencies.
I think,
Um,
yeah, I'd agree. You have to have engineering competencies, but you'd have to have basic customer service mindset, where you mentioned that the people are an asset. At Asset Leadership Network, we're not allowed to call people an asset according to our director of communications, because really people in our country, we don't want to have that as a reminder that they were at one time thought as that. So I love to say it's the relationship. And so the ability to have flexibility in relationship, the ability to have proactive attitude, customer service, to be transparent and to be transformative.
On your point about flexibility, Cecilia, it's like you have to be flexible about everything. Could you imagine? Go back to weather. So the weather changes in such a way that you have to switch your normal hubs, right? So being able to pivot immediately to conditions that have changed outside of your normal operating parameters and still function is huge.
Right.
How about being multilingual?
Oh, that's helpful.
yeah. So let's put that back over here in competencies.
Just another thought on the human capital question is, if you think about it as a sports person, it's easy to think of. A famous soccer player or football player isn't owned by a franchise. Their services are owned. So if you say human services, it makes it more palatable to those of us who are not a fan of the term human capital.
Yeah, I know. It's the words are a real problem. I can tell you the controversies around all the words.
Oh yeah, sure.
That's why when I talk with clients about it, I use people, the people, kind of the stuff you see there in caps.
Mhm.
The other thing is that, yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing, and I apologize for that.
Don't apologize.
Don't want to dwell on it. It's just, it's
Yeah.
one of our
No,
things.
it is, yeah, the reason I keep using it is because within the context, if we didn't call them capital, then, and all these other things are capital, that's the problem, but in terms
Oh,
of
yeah,
a mental
that's right.
model, but
So you put it as relational capital, and that is just perfect. And people
yep,
of the
Yeah.
relationships, that the two works, both of them work.
right. And I'll just point out to you that you can see beside the first and the last two boxes, I have those arrows going either way next to them. And those indicate that those are attracted assets. So you have to earn the right for people to contribute to your organization. And we know many stories now about companies that lose their customers, that lose their suppliers, that lose their employees, that lose their license to operate in their local market because they are not doing, they're not keeping that as a balanced relationship. And that's a really important thing for people to remember, because that's been a mental barrier in many ways for people. Well, if it's not on the balance sheet, it's not an asset. And we can talk about all those arguments about words all day, but the point is that it is part of your value production capital. So when I call it the value creation system.
Mary, let me add one to human capital, and that's, I'm not sure what the word is, but it's personality. I've become friends with my FedEx guy. He knows the name of my dog.
Yep.
He's almost a friend. Whereas if he was a very sort of off-putting, distant person, I wouldn't have the relationship with FedEx. I'd pick somebody else.
Right. And this is my tool that I created, right? So I have, the way most people don't use this category of strategic capital, but what I like to say in this is that, people get hired for both their competencies and also whether they're going to be a good fit with your culture. And the important thing about culture and putting it here is signaling that it's a management, this is management's job to support the right kinds of behaviors that support the culture. And so day to day, there may be issues with a specific employee, but it's, are the things that, like your delivery person, Ron, if he was told that they were counting every second and that he only had 5 seconds to go to your door, then he wouldn't take the time to know your dog's name and talk to you and everything. That's a management decision. He's a good guy, but he's also given the freedom to be a good guy, which might not happen in every organization.
Yeah.
So that's a great transition, Mary, because this exercise was to help us understand the value of intangible assets. And that is an issue that the ALN has been trying to figure out how to express to people. And I think this exercise does that very well. And so if we can now transition into some discussion about intangible assets, especially from your perspective. So if you are able to stop sharing your screen now.
Yeah, if I could, just a quick,
please.
A quick guidance that this is a downloadable Word form in Word, and if you want to play around with it, it's available on my website on the briefing papers page, and you're welcome to use it and change it, and it's got a Creative Commons license on it, and you're welcome. Let me know if you have questions or suggestions, that kind of thing. But
Well,
yeah, so I know
sometime during this, if you will copy and paste that into the chat, then everyone will be able to access it easier.
Will do.
All right. So then what we're going to do is have people make some opening statements about intangible properties from their perspectives, and then go into discussion. And I suspect this is going to go into overtime discussion. But anyway, so Mary, if you would start.
Well, I guess I'd love to hear from the others, and then I can jump in. But
Okay.
I think you have a sense that this is all a source of value. The average public company, most of the value is off balance sheet. Same thing for public entities. It's not just those hard assets. So what can we do to get at that. So I think we were going to go let Ron talk about how this fits with LES. Then we'll go to Jim and talk about how it's connected with ALN.
Mhm. And then
Okay.
Marty Rowland has an interesting perspective on intangible
Right.
value that we'll include also.
So
Great.
let me pick up on a point that Mary made, and she and I talk about this all the time, and that is the semantics of this area. The words don't mean the same thing to everyone. Intangible assets is one of them. There are two definitions of intangible assets. There's the sort of person on the street definition, what they think it is, and then there's the accounting definition, which is much, much narrower. And so I tend not to use the word intangible assets and prefer to talk about certainly about intellectual. I talk about the capitals rather than assets, because the word intangible in the accounting world, and this is undergoing a revolution now in accounting around a concept called integrated reporting. The way the accounting standards are set up, if I'm a technology company and I spend $40 million buying a patent portfolio, it goes on the balance sheet. If I spend the same $40 million developing the technology internally and patenting it, it doesn't go on the balance sheet. It disappears. It's an expense. Now that's crazy. It makes no sense whatsoever. And it distorts the whole make versus buy decision from a financial standpoint. So again, the semantics are really important. Take intellectual capital versus human capital. Intellectual capital generally is what includes know-how that's in the employee's head that belongs to the company because it's a trade secret, for example, or because it's proprietary, which really means the same thing. Human capital is the stuff in their head that doesn't belong to the company. It belongs to them. And when they leave, it leaves with them. And the difference, of course, is that the definition of a trade secret is it's not generally known to competitors. So part of what's in the employees' heads is known to everyone who does their job. It may be a highly skilled job, but it's generally known for people who do that job through education or work experience. And part of what's in their heads is information that somehow was created as a result of their employment by company X, and that belongs to the company. So it's one thing to draw Venn diagrams and circles, but it's another thing to really understand the relationships between these things. So that's all I'll say about semantics. What LES has done over the past 5+ years is develop a number of voluntary standards, ANSI certified standards relating to IP transactions. So we have IP strategy and transactions. So so far we have 7 committees. I'm on 3 of them. The main one that I'm on is called Intellectual Capital in the Boardroom. I've spent a lot of time on boards and see the world through the eyes of corporate directors. The other ones are evaluation. How do you numerically estimate the value of different kinds of IP? There's one on IP for startups, which is how does an early stage company create value in the early stages around their IP when it's very formative. Usually there are no patents yet, because patents usually take a couple of years before they issue. And so there's IP for startups. There's a licensing committee which talks about essentially best practices on how to conduct negotiations. So those are the committees. The one that I spent the most time is called Intellectual Capital in the Boardroom, and there's a story connected with it. It started off being called Intellectual Property in the Boardroom. And the problem was when you mention intellectual property to a corporate director, most of them anyway, they yawn and walk away because that's lawyer stuff. That doesn't have anything to do with corporate strategy. And it certainly doesn't have anything to do with the metrics that the shareholders care about, like EBITDA and cash flows and income statement and balance sheet. It has very little to do with that. And so there's a communication problem, and that is that the people who know about IP, who devote their life to IP, and I think this is a fair criticism, do not know how to explain the value of what they do in terms that are relevant to the financial community and the shareholders, whether they be individual or institutional shareholders. This is huge communication gap, and that's why the directors ignore IP, because they don't understand it. One example is if a company has a manufacturing process that is really different and highly productive, they can either keep it a secret, provided they put the right precautions around who gets access to it, or they can patent it. The difference is if they patent it, it becomes public. Now, but by making it public through a patent, they get certain legal rights around the patent. Now, the board doesn't care about which one of those alternatives the company chooses. What they care about is what is the relative comparative effect on market share. Keep it a secret or patent it. And so when you start to explain things in terms that they understand, like market share and market cap in the context of M&A, enterprise value, how much more is their company worth if they keep it a secret versus patent it? Then they start to get interested because you're talking in the language that they understand. So that's what the result is we changed the name midway through the development from IP in the boardroom to intellectual capital. And all of a sudden, the directors got really interested. That's what semantics is all about. Comments, questions?
Well, I guess, sorry, I was just going to say, I think I'm supposed to give Jim a second to chat and then.
Yeah. Okay, I'm done.
And then, okay. Thank you, Ron.
Sure.
Yeah, that was awesome. And it's sort of in the direction I was going to go too, about words and terminology. The first standards I got involved in writing were about terminology for property and asset management. And in fact, can I share my screen a minute, Nick?
Yeah, I believe so. Let me know if you have any issue with that.
I just wanted to put our chart up here, our asset taxonomy. That this is in our national asset leadership strategy, and it's also become an ASTM standard. And we chose to use the words physical and non-physical instead of tangible and intangible for some of the reasons that we've discussed. But so from an asset guy's or person's perspective, you can see how, I think you can quickly see how your boxes and categories, Mary, match up with what we have here, which is, what I've mentally been doing as you go along. The whole virtual and conceptual non-physical assets. It'd be interesting to talk to you people that know way more about that stuff than I do, how we could perhaps better categorize them. But, the attempt was the same, to be broadly inclusive of all the things that provide value. So that's one level of terminology. Another level that you got to a little bit was, well, certainly the boardroom example got there, but dealing with financial people, and we're using financial terms, but we're using them in a different way. And it's both useful and problematic, because first thing I wanted to see when you talked about capitals was, well, are you talking about things you own? Or are you talking about things beyond what you own. And I've, seen examples, in the integrated reporting website, et cetera, that, certainly the public airports are an asset to FedEx, and highways are an asset to trucking companies, and clean water and clean air are an asset to all of us. So I think there's an issue there about, communicating to finance people using their terms, but we're using them in different ways. And I know we have, I think Norberto Levin is on, as a colleague and friend who's from Argentina and is a primary proponent from the financial perspective in our development of ISO 55000. And he highlights to us that, when we're talking to finance people, they're not going to hear us. So at some point, I'd be interested to hear what Mary and Ron have to say about their experience using finance terms with non-finance people. And then the last thing I'd like to mention briefly is, I don't think Rich Culbertson is on today, but is one of our intellectual capital people. And he loves to use the word materiality. When people think, well, you can't think of everything, it's like, well, but you can think about the things that are material to your organization or to your
Jim,
point of view or espousing. Yes.
Jim, could I comment on materiality? Materiality is one of the key elements of the intellectual capital standard. And it deals with the fact that what's material to company A may not be material to company B. It has to do with maturity and size and marketplace and even geography. And so part of the standard is what we call the materiality filter, which forces the board to figure out where they are in the materiality spectrum.
Yeah. Awesome.
And same thing on the, especially on the ESG, but on the integrated reporting and management side, this focus on first, and really that exercise we just did in its own way was kind of a materiality,
Yes.
Step towards that.
Yep.
About, what are the key things we need to be thinking about, then what should we be measuring, and then how does it all get connected?
And so the worst thing you can do to a corporate director, since most of them are horrifically overworked, is make them think about something that they don't think is important. If you do that, they're not going to talk to you anymore.
It's interesting.
Sorry, I'm supposed to give Marty a second, I think, and then I'm sorry. Then we'll let folks chime in.
I would like to do a little introduction for Marty. Marty has been the key author for a standard E3210, which is for municipalities to be able to look at the critical infrastructure that's needed for the operation of their city. How do they balance the needs of hospitals, education, transportation, transit, parks and recreation? So he's talking about physical things, but what he's really doing is offering a system to approach that. And this falls into the non-tangible asset. And so, Marty, with that, will you please talk about your system?
Okay, well, appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Unfortunately, I don't have any slides, but I can describe, and based on this discussion that we had, was very enlightening. I guess what maybe I should start out is the idea of where this standard came up, why it came up. And it all came up when I was thinking about the disasters of Flint, Michigan, and then the bridge collapses that we're all familiar with, burning buildings. And it never seems to be a case where we learn from those things. It's like, oh, well, that happened. Hope that doesn't happen to me. So I came up with the idea. We had a group in ASTM, and we put this together with 15 types of infrastructure. So we kind of avoided the problem with terms, maybe. But there's, let's see what we got. So we got 10 types of tangible infrastructure, and these are things that you can touch. It's like buildings and water and monuments and things like that. But then there's 5 that really are truly intangible, and that's what I wanted to talk a little bit today. Things like food service. Okay, well, the city has a health department. They specify what can be done, can't be done. But if you think about it, people in doing that service for a city, they're driving cars, they live in buildings and all that, or they work in buildings, but those can be handled by another department. So food service within a city would be intangible because it's how well are you doing? It's kind of like the delivery of the service. Same thing with healthcare. Do you have backlogs? Do you have the masks and all the other things to provide the service of protection against COVID, for example? Security, we've all known for the last year and a half about what effective policing and fire department's all about. You can have the police in the station house, but if they're swinging clubs out in the street, it's a lot different situation. So it's like involving the community. Same thing with education and the financial system. It's like how the city works. So I guess in a nutshell, what I'm talking about is different than what Mary was talking about, is that I'm talking about what's called the public economy. Thing that's different is that where does the revenue come for the city to be run? And, we all know about taxes. Most people don't want to pay them until they live so far out that they call 911 and nobody comes. Then you say, oh, that was the reason why I lived in the city. Those kind of things. So in the analysis that I've presented in presentations, I show how the 3 standards that are used for asset management, including ISO 55000 and then the E3210, which is infrastructure management. And then there's another one, ISO 37120, that has 111 indicators of good quality of life in cities. Now you can take the 111, you can customize it, you can come up with new ones. There's nothing magical about those 111. I think it's a good start, but those are the ideas.
So that's the system that
Yeah.
could be of value to a municipality
Yeah.
to use it as a guideline to help them address all of these competing complex issues.
Yeah, well, one of the things I wanted to comment, I was really thrilled every time I watch Martin O'Malley, and when he was describing what he was doing as mayor of Baltimore, I was thinking he's describing exactly the process that's in E3210. It was like having those every so often meetings with your heads. But what I would add to that would be, what are the metrics that we have now? Where do we want to go? And where is the money going to come from? That's really the standard itself, is that there's very transparent process where you come up with your plan, you share it with the public, you fine tune it a little bit more. Then you have your first public engagement meeting where you learn what people really want. And then you go back and change a few things. And you have your second public engagement. Hopefully you've incorporated as much as you can. This really puts the rubber in the road in terms of, yeah, I want all this stuff. And then the question is, where does the money come from? And in the last slide that I usually show in my presentation is the idea that when you have revenue in a city and you provide all these infrastructure systems and the intangibles, you're actually increasing the land value of that city. And as far as you collecting the revenue that's been created, it shows the equity in having the money come back so that you can pay for the types of infrastructure that created that value. So that's really one of the measures of equity within the municipal infrastructure system. Is,
Excellent. So thank you very much for that. Now, I know
Can
that Jack
can I-
Kelly,
We gotta let Cecilia talk because I've interrupted her like 4 times.
Well, I just want to maybe take what Marty shared, and given that I have worked for years on holistic, inclusive, equitable economic development, Marty's standard speaks to what we're talking about on intangible values in a different way. We're talking about the operations of a city or a community when Marty is talking, and the integration of the interdependent parts. And that's what my holistic, inclusive economic development focuses on, not just the people part that we always go into here, but really all those piece parts. Where's the money? Let's go back to what Ron was talking about in terms of the vernacular. Those intangible assets, it's not just the land value, Marty, it's also a city's ratings and the bond value of that city. When cities have plans, asset management plans, other kinds of tangible plans that they can show a ratings organization that they are prepared for eventualities, that they are prepared for disasters, that they have integrated all of those interdependent parts, they can, one, get higher ratings, they can attract corporations, which is what the economic development organizations are trying to do. They're trying to attract businesses to come to those communities. Those businesses will not come unless there's a proven quality of life, as well as all of those items that they need to survive and operate. And so there is a place for that E3210 standard to be married with ISO 55,000, also with ISO 26,000, ISO 9,000. All of these are tools. And what I love is when Ron was talking about the issue of semantics, I have to ask this question because back in MBA school, when we came up with what was goodwill,
Oh, my God.
and acquisitions, why the heck is it that goodwill only has to be the things that we have decided? Remember, these are things that we as communities of financial people, the MBA brilliant ones, the strategists decide and put into play. They were not magical God-given things. So I have the dream that things like ESG and diversity and inclusion, DEI, now start getting performance metrics and numbers that we start looking at, that companies, they will still be individual to a company, to a community, whatever, but they have certain KPIs that we will look to and start using and create a way of tracking these.
Can I react to that? When I
Please.
hear the word goodwill, I go crazy because from my standpoint, goodwill is where things go when you don't know what else to do with them.
That's exactly it. But yet I thought they all had value. Some of what was goodwill that was sort of out there in the ethosphere
Yeah.
still had value and needed
Absolutely.
to be assessed. And you can assess it looking at the business of the organization and seeing where's the risk mitigation by having this particular asset relationship, whatever it is that we're talking about, this operational intangible, whether it's intellectual property or relational.
And smart cities is really a great case in point because these systems are going to start talking to each other, or they're already talking to each other.
Yes. I noticed Jack had his hand up. He looks itching to say something.
Yeah, you guys, I love these discussions. I mean, they're just really fascinating, and they're definitely a lot more interesting than the more nuts and bolts conversations that we tend to focus on when we talk about asset management. But we've missed an asset that I think is maybe one of the most important assets of all, and it's the nexus of leadership and culture. I mean, if you don't have those two characteristics tightly woven together, and And those two characteristics don't set the stage for innovation within your organization. People who want to be part of your organization, people who are, reduce the retention, be the place that everybody wants to be, and not just everybody, but the smartest people and the most talented people want to be. If you're, in other words, you want to be in the MCU, right? But it's the but essentially be the leader and create and sustain the culture that attracts that kind of intellectual, social, emotional power to the organization, because that really, if you don't have that, all the other stuff's going to fall apart.
God, amen, Jack, because what you just hit on is we don't do any of this for just the shareholder value or the EBITDA or making the widget. You're doing it for the people. So you have to have the leadership and the culture that attracts the people. And what you just said, I love to say it like we say in church. God wants us to have a culture, create a situation of hospitality, outrageous hospitality, so that everybody is involved. And I love to say I'm setting a table, creating a meal, creating the recipes that all will be invited to join the meal. And if you're not doing it, you want to have the hot shots want to come too, but you better have everybody in your community be there. I think one of the things we're missing in our country is this feeling that it's only got to be those who are at the top or the best of everybody, not the rest of everybody. And we want to make sure we get the rest of everybody, because they're our best ambassadors. The people at the level that are dealing with our assets on a day-to-day basis, they know what works and what the problems are and where the risk needs to be mitigated better than the senior VP of operations does. So if you're not including them and letting them have, as you say, Jack, a culture where they feel that their voice will be heard and that they matter and that they're tied to the organization's mission and goals. What do we always say? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
So Mary, I'd like to hear, you made some interesting chat comments. You got us all kicked off now. So what are you thinking now that you heard all of that stuff?
Well, I mean, I think, I love hearing these, and I can't wait to look up the models that you, Marty and Cecilia, I don't know if I can find some of your stuff online, but that basically we're all trying to create models of something that's invisible. And I just heard a great explanation. I present on these topics with a woman who's a sustainability person. We just did a session this afternoon at the Ohio Society of CPAs, and she mentioned a great concept that I hadn't heard before. She called it the glass box, and I'll try to look up quickly the name of the gentleman that coined the phrase. But especially since the industrial era started trailing down and the rise of intangible assets, companies and organizations and everything is kind of a black box, because our information isn't giving us the information. We're not getting the data we need. The goodwill is, sometimes 80% of the purchase price of something. And so where's the value? How is it all working? And we've really been then moving now where kind of between social media and, empowered stakeholders are turning companies and organizations into glass boxes as opposed to black boxes. And you can't fake it anymore. I mean, companies go along, things happen, but you can't fake it for long. And so, that was one thing, is that, it's all connected. Can we find these ways to shed the light on it? And then, I love these different models, because we're all trying to say the same thing. And the word that I put in the chat was systems thinking. I mean, that's what we're really trying to empower, is people to think not just about individual widgets or individual things or individual kinds of capital. It's how does it work as a system? And that's one of the biggest challenges we have. And Cecilia, one of my things I always recommend to people, and I often do this with clients, is to just ask the employees, ask the managers, ask the customers, and sometimes ask the customer, the senior people at customers, the same questions, how well is that piece of capital meeting your expectations? And 80% of the time they're aligned, and then that other 20, they're completely different. And man, that's a really fast way to know that you got a problem, right? What can you do to make it better?
Well, Mary, thank you for helping us make this better. And I do not want to end this, but for those who have signed on for an hour, we're going to have Nick formally close the show, but then please stick around. Let's have discussion. If there's any audience member that would like to join, please let us know in the chat and we'll make you panelists to talk. And Nick, if you could.
Yeah, sure. Just wanted to thank our patron sponsors, Definitive Logic, Onuma System, ABS Quality Evaluations, and ABS Group. Really grateful for their continued support for this and other programs. And of course, our organizational members, including Smarter Companies from Mary Adams. And the Andrew James Advisory Group is launching another ALN 855K professional certification course starting December 6th. So if you're interested in ISO 55000 professional development, then please reach out to the Andrew James Advisory Group or someone at the ALN. There are only 4 seats left available, so get on that quick. And with that, we're going to continue some discussion. You have a little more time, Mary? I
have a call, but I just texted to say I'm going to be a little late. So
okay.
This is wonderful. I love all we're seeing here. So thank you.
So what can we do next? That's what I want to see.
Okay. Could I ask a question which might lead to more discussion?
Please.
What does ISO 55000 say about intangible assets now?
Jim Dieter is the best person to answer that.
Sure. The document is written by people that are dealing with infrastructure and other tangible assets. But we recognized in the initial development that it might well apply to intangible assets as well. So it is literally a footnote that this could include intangible assets. We're working on a revision now, currently, and intangible assets are getting higher visibility. But I don't think anybody's really tested this. And that's why it's exciting when I see the 6 capitals and saying, wow, people are doing that, this integrated reporting. That sounds awesome. Now what is the, as an asset get person, how does that overlay work with this? And as one of the systems that could be involved that cuts across not just one of those boxes, but many or all of those boxes, what would that look like? And, what's the business value? An example I used in the standard with a taxonomy is a trucking company. So it's easy to think of a trucking company. We have trucks, we have offices. Okay, those are assets. But we have a warehouse. Oh, okay, so we own that. Stuff we own, we got that. But as soon as you pull out the door, you're on the public road, and you're using software and other intangible or partially intangible assets to track where you are, what you're doing, and you're breathing the air and using gasoline or electricity. So you get the breadth question, but how many organizations are thinking at that breadth? Not in, oh, there's somebody over there doing that, somebody over there doing that. But, if there is some concept that this stuff is all related in the way that it supports the organization. And I don't see anybody coming close to doing anything like that.
Well, it certainly fits with the glass box model, because if you want transparency, you gotta talk about the intangibles.
Can I throw out one quick thing that I hadn't thought of before in conversations with Mike and others, is that there are like 100 different sustainability frameworks and standards that are out there for specific things. But one of the ones that has really been rising in the amount of attention they're getting is the SASB standard, so Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. And they have, I think it's 10 or 12 industry groups and up to 70 different specific company type standards. And I hadn't ever thought about it till just now, that it would be really interesting to look at the intersection between those and the assets or the capitals. I mean, they've just merged with the Integrated Reporting Council, so they are about, they're called it the value reporting, value something foundation. Anyway, I'll look it up and share it in the chat. But they have these standards about what's material to the company. We talked about materiality, and it's designed against different industries, so that I bet if we looked, a huge percentage of these recommended KPIs are related to the capitals, right?
Mhm.
So,
I'd love to look at that. And then I don't know if you all, Ron, are aware of the fact that ALN has done for one of the most important intangibles, and that's the people aspect, the relationship aspect, and the relevant stakeholders, are advancing equity through asset leadership and asset management. Committee has given an overlay template for equity, and that focuses us in on the intangible of relevant stakeholders, and expanding beyond the usual suspects to looking at both internal and external stakeholders, partners, using the capital model where we would merge your first column, your second column and the people column as being all under relevant stakeholders. And so I think that's a real interesting exercise that we should undertake in our committee. So thank you for that, Mary.
So I also have I'd like to answer Ron's initial question with coming from a slightly different perspective, but it builds on the word value, which Jim talked about and which Mary talked about. ISO 55000 defines an asset as something that has value to the organization. So at the very outset, the very foundational definition of asset in ISO 55000 is all about value.
Perfect.
yeah,
And the data.
that's a very powerful idea. I remember seeing that when we first started talking with you. Because that's materiality, right? If it's part of the value creation system, then it matters.
It seems like a no-brainer, because there's lots of data around from World Bank and other international sources that in many industries, between 70 and 80% of the value is intangible.
Yeah.
And to ignore it in a standard like this is strange.
I do have to share that we're working on the 55,000 document, and I'm the author of one of the sections, and the section is on basic principles. So we're currently, and I mean, even this morning, we were discussing whether to add a principle dealing with sustainability. And it's not obvious to a lot of people that should be there.
Yeah.
And it's just, I shake my head. And we're also having a huge discussion about trying to define value. And I just loved, and I'm going to certainly share it with everyone there, the integrated reporting framework says the first words after value are it's subjective.
Yeah.
I did
Oh, and
want
by
to
the
say,
way, you may have already seen this, but I'll send it around anyway. But within the last couple of weeks, McKinsey put out a document, I think it's a 40-page document called Time to Get Tangible About Intangible Assets.
Oh,
yeah, I did want to bring up a point that Arthur made in his presentation and respond to Jack, is that so an asset has value. Well, if there's a piece of junk sitting in your room someplace, it's the floor space that has value for something that has no value. So you have to integrate.
that's no value to you, Marty, but if you have stakeholders, you might be able to take that equipment and give it to somebody in the community and up the value of your brand by being a good corporate citizen. So these things have to really be integrated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always, that's my teddy bear story. One day I was driving over a bridge in my car and there was a little teddy bear at the side of the road. And I thought that teddy bear is somebody's property and has great value to them. But sitting on the side of the road, it has negative value. Just, you know, there's so much. I guess the big thing that's been increasingly running through my head is how we're all growing into this space and these ideas coming together and progressing. And it's so exciting to be talking about them and to think that what we're saying and doing could potentially make a difference. I think it's exciting. And back to Mike's point, so what can we do next?
I think I have an idea, Jim, based on what you were saying. Since the concept of valuing intangibles as assets through the ISO process is new, perhaps we can do a workshop or some kind of demonstration with LES to show how this can work together with their standards and our standards. And, you know, ideally, you know, if we were to pretend that we are the mayor and council of a city, then we could incorporate Marty's concepts also. And through a workshop demonstration, provide value to others to say, oh, this would be good for us to do.
That sounds great, Mike.
I think so, Mike. I think the way to kick that off is you, on behalf of ALN or someone from ALN, should submit a proposal for that workshop, and I'll make sure that it gets to the right people at LES.
Excellent.
Good.
We can't end any better than that. So I'm just going to ask everyone to make their closing statements and say, we have accomplished a very good thing here today. So, you know, first of all, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Jim and Marty. And then thank you, Cecilia and Jack and everybody else for joining in. Nick, we don't have to tell everybody how touchy things were until the minute before these two programs started, but thanks, you got us into it really well. And go ahead, Mary.
No, I think there are a lot of dots we connected today, so let's keep doing it because I see huge potential here.
Ron?
I would just say that this conversation has been a very pleasant surprise for me. I never expected it to turn out the way it has. And I wanted to say to Jack that it's a pleasure being on a panel. Is Jack still on? I don't see him.
Yes.
It's a pleasure being on a panel with another industrial engineer. I don't meet other IEs very often. I was at Berkeley in the OR part of IE, and that led me to a lot of other things that I'm doing now. So great to meet you.
I will send an email to the both of you to
Yeah,
make a
connect.
connection.
Great.
Marty?
Yeah, I guess I just want to end by saying that as a city and a municipality is on top of its game, providing all these great infrastructure systems, those are intangible assets of the private companies that rely on the roads and the police and all these kind of things. So that's the angle. Is it's a different mindset. It's not private economy, it's the public economy. It's very important.
Shared value.
Excellent. Cecilia and Jack, do you have anything you would like to say before I let Jim close it?
I'll just say thank you for letting me jump in on this one, because I both learned some things, and I want to just remind us that, you know, just because somebody has a definition today, things are being changed, and we can be part of the rules, translating the rules of the game and changing the rules of the game to really make a difference for everybody.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, to me, that's what spending time like this is all about. It's feeling like you're learning from people that really have great perspectives on things, and you're getting to, you know, sometimes if you're lucky, you can make a contribution to the conversation. Other times you just sit back and you just enjoy it. But for me and where I am in my life, actually, this is some of the best way I know how to spend my time. So thank you all.
So we hit on
I
this.
want to thank Michael for putting it together as usual, although Jim might have been doing that, and Nick
No,
for
no,
making
Mike.
sure we were here technically.
Well, thank you.
Mike, it's all about Mike this year. That's good. I don't have to stay awake worrying about which panelists are going to show up. That's good.
I don't know how he does it all.
It's
Right,
an
go ahead,
amazing amount of
Marty.
work. But I'd say I think from an ALN perspective, last year we created these, you know, the weekly interview show, which has been awesome. Mary, you were awesome on it, and Ron, we need to get you on that. Well, we can talk about that. But you know what we have done this year with these events, and this is an example of it, is what we're calling an ALN roundtable. So the idea is to get some people together, an interesting mixture. You might think about it as what if this little group of people, you know, sat down at a table at lunch at a conference and started a conversation. But you know, with Zoom and this format, actually makes it way better than that. And getting everybody's contribution and being able to record it. So this is a format we are certainly going to continue. And this is a topic, and you know, this connection points, I think, is just a critical to all this. Is the more we can inform each other about what we're doing. And Mary, I just got to say, I mean, we're all the time talking about, and Ron too, talking about 6 capitals at our ISO 55,000 meetings now. And most people are still, I wish I could have gotten them all to show up, or to, you know, I already sent them, you know, your one pager there already, but it's, you know, it gains a lot of perspective hearing you talk about it. So just really thank you all. And let's, you know, Mike's, you know, more, maybe a little more elaborate plan sounds great, but I think certainly having these roundtables in which we can invite people to participate as just observers, you know, and then to jump in or not, I think is just so useful. I mean, it's useful to all of us in our work. We're looking for those win-wins. So well, we can do another one of these for sure. This is, you know, pretty easy to assemble.
Great. Thank you, everybody. It's not about me. It's about the sharing of the ideas. And I am happy to facilitate, do whatever I can do to allow these kinds of conversations to occur. I think we're really going to have an impact. So thank you all.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.